So, I'm here at Teget with Mark Russinovich. Mark, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Who are you?
Sure, Jeroen. Jeroen. Try to get that right. I'm a technical fellow at Microsoft. Technical fellow is the highest technical position, so people that go the technical track versus the management track, they end up at the technical fellow level, which is equivalent to vice president in the management track. There's about 20 technical fellows at Microsoft, and they include people like Anders Hallsberg and Patrick Desud, who wrote the .NET CLR and Garbage Collector, Dave Cutler, the founder, creator of Windows NT. And at Microsoft, as a technical fellow, I'm on the Windows Azure team. Windows Azure is like an operating system for the cloud. And so I'm on the Fabric Controller team of the Windows Azure group. And Fabric Controller in the cloud operating system is the equivalent of the kernel for operating system for a machine like Windows would be.
But you haven't always worked in that position, I assume. So what have you done before that? You didn't start with Microsoft, you had your own company.
That's right, yeah. So
and how did that evolve? How did you end up with Microsoft?
So if you go all the way back to the beginning, I got an Apple II. Well, my friend's dad actually got an Apple II back in 1977, one of the first, and I started playing with it, and I read then that my future was in computing. So I started writing, I reverse engineered the Apple II ROM, wrote programs for it, wrote magazine articles about Apple II, and then went to get a computer engineering degree at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in the United States. Then I went to get a master's degree in computer engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and then returned to CMU for a PhD. So I always knew, I wanted to learn as much about computers as I could. After my graduate program, I spent some time at a couple small companies that focused on Windows development and training, and then joined IBM Research. At the same time, though, I'd started ntinternals.com, it was called back then. It's a site to give away free software, with a friend of mine, Bryce Cogswell, who I met in grad school. We also set up a commercial company to sell some of the software that we were writing, and that was called WinTernals.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so over the next 10 years or so, from 95 to 2005, WinTernals grew. We started hiring people. I quit IBM in 2002, and in the meantime, it also started working on Windows Internals book series with Dave Solomon, coming to Microsoft. So I made lots of connections with Microsoft people, and started talking about joining Microsoft at some point. So we started talking about what that would take, and they looked at the technologies at WinTernals and ended up buying the company. So I joined Microsoft in 2006. Joined the Windows division. Worked on the tail end of Vista right as it was getting ready to ship, and then Windows 7. And then this summer switched over to Windows Azure after talking to a bunch of people on the Azure team, seeing a good opportunity there.
So you have really been focused on the internal stuff, actually. Is there internals between your previous position and now the Azure position? Is it the same, or is it completely different, your work?
Well, so from the implementation, it's very different. So Windows Azure is a distributed operating system, essentially, and Windows kernel and Windows operating system focused on the resources of a single machine. But the concepts are very similar. The architecture is very similar. And you're allocating resources across the data center instead of resources on the local computer. So it's interesting to me because you're really just taking things up a level. Individual nodes running Windows, but then making those all work as an operating system across a whole thousands of computers is raising up those levels of abstraction, raising up those concepts. So they map pretty well.
So there will be coming a new Windows internal book eventually, I assume. But will you have part in that, or will you now just focus on the Azure stuff? For instance, Azure internals.
So we released the 5th edition of the book series last summer, and that was on Vista and Server 2008. And we started work on the 6th edition, which covers Server 2008 R2 and Windows 7. So we're still working on that. It's me, Dave Solomon, and Alexei Ionescu, the same three that worked on the 5th edition. We're all having tough time finding time to work on the book, especially now in my new role where I'm focused on something else, not Windows. It's tougher to find time, but we are committed to getting the book out. So hopefully looking at the end of Q1, so March or April of next year. It's a lot of work to get one of those books out.
Of course. your previous project, the sysinternals tools, are they going to evolve as well? I'm thinking like phone internals, cloud internals.
Yeah.
Is that something?
Yeah, actually, so I'll continue to evolve the tools. Just because I've switched to the Windows Azure team doesn't mean I've lost my interest in the operating system.
And are you still developing them yourself, or aren't you really involved in that anymore? Just
no, it's still me. In fact, at the time of the acquisition, just me and Bryce continue to work on the tools. Bryce Cogswell. The sysinternals was really not changed through the acquisition. Me, Bryce write the tools, and we've got a program manager that manages the website and publishes the tools for us when we give them updates. So Bryce actually retired from Microsoft about a month ago.
Yeah. So
now it's just me working on the tools, which I continue to do. In fact, this week I'm releasing a major new version of Process Explorer. So I continue to work on those, but I'll also be working on Windows Azure tools as well. And I'm working on a Windows Azure Storage Explorer, which lets you browse and manage and edit your your Windows Azure storage data. And that's about 80% done. It's should be out next month or two.
Well, that's exciting, of course.
Yeah.
And in your role as a kernel developer, you're really working at the kernel level. How do you do your job? Are you just using Visual Studio, or how do you? So
for you're talking about my new role. So Windows Azure, actually, large chunks of Windows Azure are written in C#, whereas the Windows operating system itself is written in C primarily. So all the development's done in Visual Studio.
Yeah, just Visual Studio.
Yeah,
actually.
Visual Studio with C#.
And previously it was also Visual Studio, or
no? Well, in Windows Division, the Windows operating system is developed using a build environment, which actually Windows Azure uses as well. But the way that people edit the Windows source is using whatever editor they want to. So there have been some attempts to integrate the Windows development environment with Visual Studio, but primarily up until this point it's been, some people like Emacs still, some people like Slick Edit, and that's the way that they edit the source code to Windows. Whereas in Windows Azure, you can debug right inside of Visual Studio, so people use that.
And one last question.
Yeah.
From your point of view, at school, students don't get really internal stuff. Do you think it's important that the developer has that knowledge, or is it just optional and sometimes handy?
So it's kind of a nuanced answer to this. One of the things that you get in with operating system internals is you learn about threading, and a lot of students miss some of those fundamental concepts when they don't take those kinds of courses that lead them into how to write a multi-threaded application, how memory is managed. And you can spend your career not worrying about that kind of stuff, but I think that separates a really good developer from one that's just an okay developer, because you understand the way that your application interacts with the underlying environment. So when things go wrong, you have got a better idea of how to figure out what's gone wrong and how to address it. If you don't know about threading and you run into a asynchronous, kind of resource contention problem, then
you can't figure out
you're lost.
what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So internals, the exact implementation details I don't think are that important, but the concepts I think.
It can be especially handy in debugging scenarios where you have
just writing code
you have to find where the problem is.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your time.
Sure. Thanks.